Classes in Wargame Design, a series of lectures based on George Philly's book, Designing Board Wargames, Introduction, to be available from Smashwords.com and Amazon Kindle. And today, Lecture 7, Zones of Control. Stalingrad, Combat Rules. Good afternoon. This is Professor George Phillies, and I am preparing this lecture for delivery via the Internet. The core issue is a local weather situation, and therefore, instead of seeing me standing in front of a chalkboard lecture, you're going to see me lecturing as I point at segments of my book, the book which is still under process of being written. We're going to spend most of today discussing the combat rules for Stalingrad, but I am going to start off, roughly speaking, where I left, discussing effects of various issues such as terrain on movement. So here we have dark brown squares. Those brown squares are mountain squares. We also have this hashed line, that's a railroad. We also have the blue lines, those are river lines. The mountains change color between here and there because the darker area is the area inside the country of Hungary. There is a special movement rule for Hungary, namely on the first turn, units may not move into it, advance into it, or be retreated into it. It's unenterable terrain. However, we're looking at some turn after the first, and here is a Russian 696. The Russian 696 is preparing to exit from Hungary. So it makes its first square of movement, the green line, and it moves from one mountain square to another. It's done that across a hex edge, there's the hex edge, that is not crossed by a railroad, for example, this railroad. So this unit has now crossed all of the rough terrain hex edges that it is allowed to do so. As a result, it can't move further this way and enter clear terrain because it has to stop at this point if it's moving along the straight line. However, because this is a rail square and the 696, our cavalry unit here, there's the cavalry symbol, it's a 696, has moved onto the rail line, it is allowed to do two things. First, it is allowed to use the rail bonus to move along the railroad as far as it likes until something else stops it. Second, it is allowed to move along the railroad using its regular movement rate. That is, having reached here with one movement point, it could then go here, and here, and here, and here, and it would have used 4 movement points at this point. Now, having said it can only cross one mountain square hex edge per turn, if it's just a regular rough terrain hex edge, that means once the unit moves here, it cannot move to this square, HH12. It cannot do so because it would then have crossed 1, 2 rough terrain hex edges through normal movement in the same turn. That's not allowed. Ditto, just as the unit cannot follow path 1 to reach square JJ10, so also the unit cannot move straight from JJ12 to II13. The unit does, however, if the player is clever, have a way of reaching HH12. Namely, the 696 moves here, that's just a movement into clear terrain. Here, that's just a movement into clear terrain. Along the railroad to here. And now, since it's moved here by railroad, it gets to move 1 square off the railroad to HH12. So those are the sorts of moves that are allowed. Note also, if the unit 696 starts here, it could move onto the railroad, follow the railroad to this square, and once it's on this square, it can move sideways in either direction. So that's what we can say about rough terrain movement. We now advance from movement towards combat. The first issue is where combat units are on the board and what this says about which units are attacking which other units. The core issue is that military units are not constrained to cover exactly a certain number of feet of space. They can be compressed together, so if we're making an attack, we put a large number of units close together. They advance not quite shoulder to shoulder under modern conditions, but they advance with a great amount of force being put across a fairly narrow front. On the other hand, if we want to, we can spread military units out so that a single military unit can try to cover a considerable amount of line. The further out the unit is spread, the less effective it is at holding the line, but units can be either compressed or spread out. Compression is represented by stacking. That is, here we have a square, there's the square, and we have sitting on the square not one but 3 different German units. That's quite different from the situation in, say, chess or checkers, where only one piece is allowed to occupy a single square. There are a wide variety of different stacking rules. In Stalingrad, the stacking rule allows us to place up to 3 units on the same square. The stacking rule is applied at 2 points during the turn. It's applied at the end of movement and at the end of combat. At the end of movement, all of my units must be arranged so that I have a maximum of 3 units on a single square. If I tried to put 4 units on this square and it's the end of my move is illegal and I am required to fix it. However, we can also enforce the stacking rule at the end of combat. The reason you need to do so is that as a result of combat, units may be required to retreat, or they may be allowed to advance. If units are required to retreat, in Stalingrad the retreat is always through 2 squares, the units may never be retreated to form an illegal stack. If I had combat going on over here someplace, and one of my units was required to retreat as a result of combat, it could not be retreated into this square because this square is entirely full. That unit would either have to be retreated to some other square if possible. For example, perhaps it could be retreated to the square I'm indicating. If the unit had no legal retreat route, it would be destroyed as a result of combat. In addition, if I make an attack with these units, say I'm attacking this square, I might be attacking with 3 units here, 3 units here, 3 units here, and under certain circumstances I would be allowed to advance my units into the square being defended here. However, the advance is restricted by the stacking rule. I may be attacking with 9 units, but I am only allowed to advance 3 of them into the square I have just captured and am allowed to advance into. That's a limitation on advances. So, we have stacking, and the stacking rule is a significant part of combat in a variety of ways. So here we have a typical unit on the board. The typical unit on the board is on the square L45, and on the 6 surrounding squares we've placed red stars. The red stars indicate the zone of control of the unit on the central square. Zones of control affect movement, they determine combat, they affect supply. The most important rule on movement is that if you move into the zone of control of an enemy unit with one of your units, your moving unit must stop immediately and move no farther. Here we have a Russian unit in a German unit's zone of control. There are actually 2 German units, the 6th here, the 4th there. Each German unit has its own zone of control consisting of the 6 squares next to the square on which the German unit is sitting. The Russian unit starts here, and because it starts here, there are certain moves it is not allowed to do. It is not allowed to move, red line, straight from here to there, because that would be moving straight through the zone of control of an enemy unit. That's against the rules. It's not allowed to move from here straight down to here because that would be moving on top of an enemy unit. You aren't allowed to do that. You also aren't allowed to start here and move from here and then there, because that's moving across an enemy unit, that's also not allowed. Finally, the unit here would not be allowed to move from this square to this square, because when it did, it would be moving straight from one zone of control to another of the same German unit, the 6th. And in addition, it could not continue its way farther to this square. If there were Russian units on this square, there would be no effect on the ability of this unit to move. The zone of control is the 6 squares around each unit, and neither terrain nor the presence of friendly or enemy units has any effect. The Russian unit here, though, does have several legal moves. It could start here, and it could move to this square. That's moving out of a zone of control into a square not in a zone of control. That's perfectly allowed. It could also move out from here to here. That's also moving out of the zone of control of all of the German units. And having done so, the Russian infantry could continue on its way to here, and if it wanted, to here. When it moved to the 3rd square, 1, 2, 3, it would have entered the zone of control of the 4th infantry, and therefore when the Russian unit reached here, it could stop. It would be required to stop. The Russian unit could also move directly from this square to the neighboring square M46. That's moving from the zone of control of one unit out of that unit's zone of control directly into the zone of control of a second unit. That's entirely allowed. It's not the same as moving from here to here, which is moving from square to square in the zone of control of the same unit, the 6th Infantry. Finally, the Russian unit could move out of a zone of control and back into the zone of control of the same unit. That move is allowed. Now, having given this list of moves, and allowed and not allowed, it's important to emphasize the zone of control is always the 6 squares around each unit. The zone of control is not affected by terrain. The zone of control is not affected by the presence of other units. So if there had been a Russian unit on M45, here's M45, the Russian unit here the Russian unit, the 28th, would still not have been allowed to move from this square to that square. We now advance to considering combat. In the image here, the 3 Russian units on T21 were moved into this square during the Russian player's turn. There was a German unit here on U21. Because this was the Russian player's turn, the German unit did not move. The Russian player has moved units into the German player's zone of control, the zone of control of a German unit. Because Russian and German units are in each other's zone of control, namely these units are in the zone of control of this unit, and this unit is in the zone of control of these units, there must be combat. The general rule is that every unit in the zone of control of an enemy unit must either be an attacker or a defender. So in this case, we have 3 units with an attack factor of 4 each, total of 12 attack factors, attacking one German unit with a defense factor of 4. That's a 3-to-1 attack. The procedure is that the Russian player has ended the movement portion of her turn. She now, having done this, goes across the map and splits the combat into battles. Battles require that attackers and defenders be on adjoining squares. So here we have a battle. There are no other units involved. Once the things have been broken into battles, the Russian player goes through one battle at a time, announces the combat odds, we'll get to that later, invokes the combat results table, and rolls one die, and the die tells what happens in the battle. The die reflects all of the things that the players don't see, the fine details of the movement of individual men and pieces of equipment of the 4 combat units you see here. The die handles that. Let's consider a more complicated example of combat. Suppose in this case it is the turn of the Russian player. The Russian player has ended the movement phase of her turn and has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 combat units in the zones of control of these 2 German combat units. The Russian player must now divide the combat into battles. The requirement is for units to be in a battle, each unit on the attacker side must be next to each unit that is on the defender side, and each unit on the defender side must be next to all units on the attacker side in the battle. So, for example, we'll start here. Here is a German unit, and these 2 Russian units are only next to this German unit. Therefore, these 2 Russian units absolutely must be attacking the German that I'm pointing at. Similarly, the 28th Infantry, this Russian 7-10-4, is adjacent to only one of the 2 German units. Therefore, this Russian unit must attack this German unit. No choice. However, there are 2 more units, 1, 2. These 2 units, Russian units, are adjacent to both German units. Therefore, these 2 German units could attack here or attack here. They have a couple of constraints, though. These 2 units, the 64 and the 37, are not next to the R/11. The 28th is not next to the R/5. Therefore, you cannot combine this into one big battle because all of the attacker units are not next to all of the defender units. These 2 units are not next to this unit. The 28th is not next to the R5. So you have to have 2 battles indicated by the blue division line. The German, however, the Russian I mean, now has a choice as to how he divides things into battles. For example, he could say that this unit and this unit will both attack the 2-2-4, making the attack 7, 14, 19 to the defense here, and 5, 10 to the defense there. He could also say we will have this unit, and this unit attack here. That's 15 attack factors against the Russian here, and 7, 14 attack factors, against the German here, 7, 14 attack factors against the German here. So there are a bunch of different ways to divide things. All of those divisions are legal. Here is a slightly different circumstance in which the 5 Russian units have been moved to different squares. This time, all 5 Russian units are next to both German units. If the Russian player chooses to do so, he can make this as one large attack in which the 5 Russian units attack both German units at the same time. All of the Russian units are adjacent to the German units being attacked. The Russian units aren't next to each other, but there is no rule requiring that. So in this case, we could have attack rolled as one big battle in which 29 Russian attack factors attack these 2 German units. There are 2 exceptions to the combat rule that units adjacent to each other always fight. First, in the southern edge of the map, there is the terrain feature identified on the board game map as the Straits of Azov, the Kerch Straits actually. Combat is not allowed across the Kerch Straits. A German unit on one side of the straits and a Russian unit on the other side of the straits will occupy adjacent squares. However, they can't attack each other, it's not allowed. Even though there is no zone of control on top of the enemy unit, if you cannot move across the Kerch Straits if there is an enemy unit blocking the far side. Second, there is a rule limiting attack odds. The attacker cannot organize his attacks so that he has a unit attacking at combat odds worse than 1 to 6. If he does, those units are eliminated from play before the rules on dividing combat into battles are worked out. And then, after units that could only attack at combat odds of worse than 1 to 6, like 1 to 7, after those units are removed from the board, you get to check if all adjacent units are involved in some battle. Oh yes, that's some one battle. An attacking unit can only be involved in one attack during the turn. A defending unit can, during a combat turn, only be attacked once. I have been mentioning the combat odds. There's a combat results table. It has a set of vertical columns labeled with combat odds. But it doesn't have many vertical columns. It has 1 to 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, and nothing in between. How do we convert the actual combat odds into the combat odds on the combat results table? The answer is that we do a reduction. Case 1, there are more attacking combat factors than defending combat factors. In that case, you divide the number of attacking combat factors, A, and the number of defending combat factors, D, by D. You then truncate, well, D over D is 1, A over D is some number, and you truncate the number. You round it downward, so that, for example, a 2.95 to 1 becomes a 2 to 1. Thus, a 10 to 2 becomes a 10 over 2 to 2 over 2, or 5 to 1. 60 to 20 becomes 60 over 20 to 20 over 20, or 3 to 1. However, 59 to 20 becomes 59 twentieths over 20 twentieths, or 2.95 to 1, which truncates to 2 to 1. Well, that's what happens if there are more attackers than defenders. What if the defenders outnumber the attackers? In that case, you divide A and D by A, the number of attacking units. Attacking factors, I should say. A over A is always 1. You round D over A upwards. Thus, 10 to 20 becomes 10 over 10 to 20 over 10, or 1 to 2. 19 to 20 becomes 19 nineteenths to 20 nineteenths, or 1 to 1.06, and 1.06 rounds upwards to 2, so a 19 to 20 is a 1 to 2. General rule, no matter which is the smaller number, A or D. Here D is smaller, here A is smaller. The smaller number is always reduced to a 1. The larger number is truncated or rounded up to the next integer, and that tells you which integer column on the combat results table to use. So we roll on the combat results table. We've identified the right column on the combat results table to use. We roll a die, and corresponding to the intersection of the combat odds column and the die roll, we find a combat result. What are the combat results? The two simpler results are A elim, AE, and D elim, DE, and in these two cases the attacker is eliminated or the defender is eliminated. What happens? All units in the battle belonging to the attacker or to the defender are removed from the board. Where do the units go? They're placed into something known as the dead pile. There are actually two dead piles, one for each player. By convention and custom, the dead piles are placed in the Black Sea. At any time, each player can inspect the two dead piles and see what units each side has lost as a result of combat. There are two more results, A2, A back 2, and D back 2, the attacker units are retreated 2 squares, the defender units are retreated 2 squares. The player who wins the battle determines where the units are retreated to. So if the attacker is retreated 2 squares, A back 2, his units are moved backwards by the defender. If the defender is retreated 2 squares, D back 2, the defending units are retreated 2 squares by the attacker. However, there are a couple of limits on retreats. First of all, you may never retreat off the board. You may never retreat onto C squares, onto lake squares, unless they're frozen. You may never retreat through the zone of control of an enemy unit. You can retreat through your own zones of control. You can retreat across large stacks of units. You have to end up in a legal stack. If you have no retreat, which gives you a location where you wouldn't be overstacked, 4 high, 5 high, 6 high, your units are eliminated. The attacker, in retreating a large number of units from one battle, may, of course, try to arrange things so some of the defender units have no retreat. That are the D back 2 and A back 2 rules. Notice that I did not say that the retreats have to be in straight lines. They could be in zigzags. I did not say that the retreats have to be in the backwards direction. The German player's units do not have to be retreated to the west. The Russian player units do not have to be retreated to the east. That decision is made for an A back 2 by the defender and for a D back 2 by the attacker. We now examine several examples of battles and retreat rules. There are a couple more combat results out there, in particular the exchange. We'll get to the exchange later. So here are a collection of Russian and German units. Suppose it is the Russian player's turn to move. In A, the Russian has 2 units here. There is 1 German unit there. The combat odds are 5 plus 5, or 10 to 2, 5 to 1. However, the Russian unit, because it's here and there are more Russian units here, the German unit has this little problem. It has no legal retreat path. It can be retreated to V14 as the first square of its retreat, but it's now stuck. It can't be retreated off the board. That's illegal. It can't be retreated into the Baltic Sea. That's illegal. It can't be retreated here because the square I'm now pointing at, where the 9th Infantry of the Germans is adjacent to a Russian unit and is therefore in a Russian zone of control. And therefore this unit has no legal retreats. What about over here? There are 2 Russian units attacking. They've gotten themselves surrounded. No fewer than 5 German units. The Russian units have a range of options as to how they arrange their attacks. For example, they can say we have 14 attack factors. There are 4, 8, 12, 16, 19 defense factors of Germans. We will make the attack as 14 to 19 or 1 to 2. Alternatively, the Russians could split the combat into 2 battles. The 2 battles would involve each of the 2 Russian units attacking some number of the German units. Those would also be legal. Now, if it was the Germans' turn to move, things would be a little different. Namely, we have 5 Germans here attacking 2 Russian units in the middle. The Germans can either make it as one big attack, a 19, there are 19 attack factors there, to 20. 19 to 20 is a 1 to 2. Alternatively, the Germans could split the battle into 2 combats, one of which is fought at, say, for example, 12 to 10 or 1 to 1, and the other is fought at 7 to 10 or 1 to 2. So these two units could attack this one, and these three units could attack the 28th Infantry. Over here, the Romanian unit would be attacking at odds of 2 to 7 plus 7 is 14. 2 to 14 is a 1 to 7. That attack is illegal. So what happens after all of the battles are divided up, the R/11 here is attacking at illegal odds, so it's removed from the board before any other combat is resolved. We now reach the last combat result, the exchange. The exchange causes both sides to lose units. The procedure is as follows. The battle is fought. After the battle has been fought, the side that has fewer attack factors in the battle loses all of their units. The other side must lose at least as many attack factors. So, for example, here, suppose we had 4, 8, 12, 16 attack factors of Germans attacking one of the 7, 10, 4s. That would be a 16 to 10 or 1 to 1. The die is rolled on the 1 to 1 column. A 2 is rolled, meaning an exchange. The side with fewer attack factors, that's the 7, 10, 4. The 7, 10, 4 is eliminated, and the Germans must lose at least 7 attack factors. As it happens, if you look at this stack, they can't lose 7 attack factors. They therefore have to lose at least 8. On the other hand, suppose the attack had been these two Germans, 4 plus 4, 8 attack factors attacking the 7, 10, 4. That attack would be an 8 to 10 or 1 to 2. On a 1 to 2 attack, there is still an exchange. The side with fewer attack factors now is, however, the Russian. So the Russian player loses her 7, 10, 4, and the Germans must lose at least as many units, or 2 8s. As a more dramatic example, suppose that all of the German units, there are 19 attack factors, attack both Russians. There are 19 attack factors hitting 20 defense factors, that is a 19 to 20 or 1 to 2. An exchange is rolled. In this case, the Russian has fewer attack factors, even though he had more defense factors. The Russian has fewer defense factors, so the Russian units are eliminated, and the German must lose at least 7 plus 7 or 14 attack factors. The German can't quite pull that off, but for example, he could choose to lose 3 4 4 4s for 12 and 1 3 3 4 for 3. That's 15. And you notice, even though the attack was at 1 to 2, the stronger side, in fact, in defense factors, was wiped out, and the side with the fewer attack factors still has people left on the board. We now come to advances and retreats after combat. Under some conditions, a defending unit is doubled on defense because of terrain. For example, here, this Russian unit is defending on a clear square. The attacking German units are all on river squares, and therefore the Russian unit is doubled on defense. So we have these large stacks of German units attacking this Russian unit. The Russian unit is worth, however, not 6 defense factors, but, because it's doubled, 12 defense factors. After combat, the Russian unit has either been eliminated or forced to retreat. And because it's been eliminated or forced to retreat, there are no units left on this square. Because the German units were attacking a doubled Russian unit, and all Russian units have been driven off the defending square, the Germans are entitled to advance units, whichever 3 units they choose, onto this square. They choose to advance from here to there. It is important to emphasize that advances and retreats are not movement. Advances and retreats are not restricted by friendly zones of control. Advances are not restricted by hostile zones of control. Retreats are blocked by hostile zones of control. Advances and retreats, however, do not allow you to violate the stacking rules. So there is an example of an advance after combat. The Germans get to occupy a square that they were not originally in. Here we see an actual combat results table. The columns correspond to combat odds from 1 to 6, the lowest legal odds, up to 6 to 1. If an attack is made at higher odds, say 7 to 1, the defending units are automatically removed from the board, no die roll necessary. At intervening odds, you get all sorts of results. For example, at 1 to 1, there's a D a limb, an exchange, a D back 2, an A back 2, and 2 A limbs. All 5 combat results are available. At 1 to 1, about half the time, the attacker gets favorable results. About half the time, he gets unfavorable results. The attacker a limb result can be quite expensive, and therefore you might prefer to attack at combat odds where it doesn't happen. And those combat odds are the 3 to 1. There is an attacker eliminated at 2 to 1, in which case the attacker takes really large casualties. At 3 to 1, there is no attacker eliminated, and there is no attacker back 2. At 3 to 1, the attacker always wins. The defender may be wiped out. The defender may be forced to retreat. There may be an exchange with both sides taking casualties. As you increase the combat odds from 3 to 1 to 4 to 1, the likelihood that the attacker will take casualties falls, and if you get up to 5 to 1, the only results are D a limb and D back 2. There is no likelihood whatsoever that the attacker will take casualties. On the other hand, as the combat odds get worse and worse and worse, it is less and less likely that the attacker will win. The lowest odds at which there is any likelihood of an attacker victory is a 1 to 2. At 1 to 2, there may be a D back 2 or there may be an exchange, but other than that, the attacker either retreats or is wiped out. At 1 to 3, there are only results unfavorable to the attacker. There are 4 A back 2s, there are 2 A limbs. Notice that the attacker takes fewer casualties at 1 to 3 than at 1 to 2 because he's driven back 2 squares rather than suffering an exchange. And we work down, and finally at odds of 1 to 6, one time in 6 the attacker could roll an A back 2. The rest of the time the combat results are attacker eliminated, AE, and that's it for the attacking units. In some cases, terrain affects combat. It affects combat by doubling the strength of the defending units. Terrain does not affect advances or retreats. If a unit has an A back 2 or a D back 2, it is retreated 2 squares, even if it is retreating 2 squares through mountains or through swamps. It couldn't move 2 squares, but it can retreat 2 squares. The first example of combat and effects on combat is caused by rivers. If the attacking units are on river squares and the defending units are not on the same river, the attacking units find that the defender is doubled. However, there's some complications. This is a river end square. If the attacker is on the river end square and the defender is on the square that the river end points at, this river end points here, this river end points there. If the attacker is on a river end square and is attacking here, G, the attacker finds that the defender is not doubled. On the other hand, if the attacker is here and the defender is here, this is a square at which the river end does not point, a unit here attacking here finds that the defender is doubled. In the simple case, suppose we have attacking units on U-29 and T-30 and a defending unit on T-29. The attacking units are all attacking from river or river end squares. The defender is behind the river. The defender is doubled. On the other hand, suppose we have huge stacks of Germans here, and we have one Romanian 224 here also participating in the attack on T-29. If any at all of the attacking units are not on river squares, one is enough, the defender is not doubled. The unit that is making the attack from the non-river square is called an undoubling unit. And here is a Y intersection. Y intersections you have to watch a bit. The general rule is that if you are attacking along a river from one river square to an adjoining square of the same river, the attacker finds that the defender is not doubled. So if the attacker is down here and the defender is here, the attacker is attacking along the river and the defender is not doubled. On the other hand, suppose that the defender is the point I'm indicating. The defender is here. An attacker here is on the river square of the same river and a different river, and in that case, the defender is doubled. One way of thinking about this is to say that if this river were not here, and the attackers were here, well, attackers on a river, defenders behind the river, the defender is clearly doubled. Adding a river to the map does not undouble defending units. And that is how you think about Y intersections. Now let's consider some actual examples of units fighting over that terrain. So here we have 3 4.6.4s and a stack of 8.8.6s. The German units are on a river end square. If they attack, well, let's see. This Russian unit is on an adjoining square of the same river. It's not doubled. This Russian unit is behind the river relative to these Germans. It is doubled. This unit is on a plain terrain square, but these Germans are on the river end square that points at this square, and therefore this 4.6.4 is not doubled. If you rolled it as one big battle, it would be 6 plus 6 plus 6 doubled equals 12, a total of 24 Russian defense factors, and the 24 Russian defense factors would be being attacked by 24 German attack factors, a 1-to-1. The German could, of course, split this combat into one or more battles as he saw fit, and some of the battles would be at different odds. For example, 2 of these 8.8.6s could attack this 6, 16-6, or 2-to-1. The final 8.8.6 could attack these units, 8 to 6 plus 12, 8 to 18, or 1 to 3. What about here? If the Germans are attacking, both of these German units in attacking the 27 infantry would be attacking along a river line, so the 27th would not be doubled. If this German was tasked with attacking this Russian, the German is on a river line, the Russian is behind the river line, the odds would be 8-12 or 1-2. On the other hand, if hiding off the map here there was a German 4.4.4, the German 4.4.4 is not on a river line. It acts as an undoubling unit, and the odds would then be 8 plus 4 equals 12-6 or 2-1. If the Russian is attacking, this Russian attacking here, the Russian is on a river line with respect to the 14 armor, so the German is doubled against an attack from here. If the Russian attacks the 41 armor, the Russian is on the river line that runs vertically, and guess what? The river line runs vertically, and therefore the German unit is doubled with respect to this unit. However, if the Russian attacks with both combat units, then it turns out this unit undoubles the German because it's not behind on a river square, and the odds are 8 to 8 or 1 to 1. I shall briefly emphasize that 1 to 1 are not good attacking odds when you have alternatives, because half the time, roughly speaking, the attacking units are destroyed. Of course, sometimes you don't have a better option. Finally, let us consider how weather affects combat and movement. We have here a pair of Russian units, a pair of German units. If we were in summer and the German armor here wanted to move to here, it would need to move 1, 2, 3 squares through the swamp. You could move through the swamp at 1 square per turn. It would take the German 3 turns to execute the move. The German here could do a rail move and get from this square to this square all in 1 turn. The red line movement in summer, in non-bad weather, would be illegal because that's a lake and you can't move through lakes. On the other hand, suppose this was winter. In winter, the swamp shown here, it's well north on the map, freezes over. It functions as clear terrain, and the German unit could move 1, 2, 3, all in 1 turn. This other German unit could move 1 onto the frozen lake without slowing down, 3, and the other German unit could get to the indicated location, I-34, all in 1 turn, because the frozen terrain acts as clear terrain. Furthermore, because we are in winter, the Svira River, indicated here, has frozen over and does not double in combat. So this 886 attacking a 464 would be seeing an undoubled 464, an 8 to 6 or 1 to 1 attack. The other 886 attacking this way would also be attacking at 1 to 1 because it's attacking across clear terrain. Now, if the German makes this move, there is one minor hazard. If the next German turn is not winter, there is some likelihood that the weather will be perfect or mud instead of snow. If the weather is perfect or mud, Lake Ladoga thaws, and when the lake thaws, any units on the lake are destroyed. Therefore, the German might wish to hesitate before making this move, unless there are very strong reasons for making